approximately 73 years old to 59 years old. What you're seeing is the destruction of people itself. When we talk about
there's a reverse trend. Arun,
commodities.
Thank goodness there's a reverse trend here. It's getting better. Okay. But no, I see your point.
But that's an extreme crash. That is unprecedented in human history for an industrialized country to achieve a drop in life expectancy outside of a war was unknown until the collapse of the Soviet Union.
And you can see why Russians are very sensitive about the 1990s because of the shock therapy that was practiced in this country, and people haven't forgotten it. Tom, you've been wanting to jump in. Go ahead.
This is a very important point that Arun brought up, but he's got it backwards. If we look at the percentage of the population that's living on $2 or $3 a day, it's abysmally high, but it's falling, and that is the key. It used to be that almost everyone, except for the tiny ruling elites who controlled the states, lived at such an abysmal level of poverty. That percentage has been falling as a percentage of world population. He mentioned the case of India. He said, well, still it's the case there are lots of poor. People in India have always 80%. Been poor. Wake up. And the question is, are they getting richer or poorer? That's the relevant question. Poverty is the natural state of mankind, and wealth has to be created. It's created by free market capitalism, by investment, by production, and by exchange. So if you want to look at India, the question is has it been changing since 1991 for better or for worse? And the question is unmistakable, for better. And the same thing in China. I visit both countries.
All right, I'd like to change gears, gentlemen. I want to go back to Richard in Bangkok. Okay, let's look at the Great Contraction going back to 2008. I mean, the way I look at it is that we've seen banks bailed out, we've seen corporations bailed out. If we go to TARP in the United States, I mean, it's always the rich people being bailed out. Is that how capitalism is supposed to work? Because are these the people only creating jobs for the rest of us?
Well, again, I think that the government recognizes that whether it thinks that we have capitalism or not is irrelevant. It's clear that if they don't bail out the banks, and for that matter, the major automobile companies, that if the banks go bankrupt, it's going to destroy everyone's wealth. That $50 trillion I keep talking about would completely disappear, and we would all be hungry. So they had no choice. But no, this is not classical capitalism. But capitalism is based on a gold standard. The reason we had the Roaring '20s and the Great Depression is because the gold standard broke down in World War I and created a big credit bubble during the '20s. The same things happened this time. The gold standard broke down with the Bretton Woods system in 1971. It created a very long credit boom, and now that credit boom is blowing up, and we're likely to collapse into a new Great Depression unless we come up with some very clever new strategies to resolve this crisis.
Tom, what do you think about that? Because a lot of people say that the Western financial institutions, their toolbox is empty right now, that this Great Contraction is not like we've had recessions since the Second World War. There's something fundamentally wrong, and there has to be some fundamentally new answers to the problems that capitalism faces today. What would you say to that?
I'd say the first question is bailouts are not a feature of capitalism. It's not a feature of the free market that someone whose best friend is the Treasury Secretary gets a giant check like Goldman Sachs did. This is cronyism. It's pure, unadulterated cronyism that we're suffering from right now. Bailouts of the banks, bailouts of companies, the nationalization of General Motors by the American government, and what's happening in other countries around the world as well is cronyism. We've seen is a real crisis of interventionism. If you ask what caused this crisis, sorry?
Would you have let them crash?
I absolutely would have let them fail.
Would you have let them collapse?
That's part of the
Would you have not bailed them out if you were in charge?
Market economy is firms can rise if they produce value and satisfy customers, and they go out of business if they don't.
I agree with what Richard is saying.
Okay, Arun, I want to go to you. It looks like the system we have now is that we have capitalism for the rich, and we have nothing else for, well, I'm sorry, we have socialism for the rich, and we have capitalism for the poor. How do you like that? Do you agree with that phrase or not?
I think that's a very accurate way of putting it, and I think that Richard brings up an important point in terms of, yes, something had to be done. What we see is free marketers like Tom peddle this ideology of burn the house down, let it burn down if that what happens. Now, what happened with the credit crisis is that